About 600 big-name retail stores have closed in Canada in the last 3 years. That's led to about 17,000 jobs lost. That's a big deal. What's causing that? Is that all the Amazon effect, or is there something more happening? And what's the effect of that going to be on the overall Canadian economy and people in general? Well, I've got someone who knows the answers to all of those questions, and we're going to discuss it starting right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hughes.
I've wanted to get my guest on this podcast for a while, and so I reached out to her on Twitter, and she said, yeah, sure, Dougie, I'll come on your little podcast. That'd be fun. That'd be cool. So we were going back and forth, talking about questions and everything that we'd talk about, and I wanted to talk to her about the retail apocalypse, because she's done a lot of writing on that. And then she said, well, it's going to be a little tricky because my boss is a little leery of me coming on your little podcast because, I don't know, I guess even though I've done all this research, they don't think I know what I'm talking about or something. I don't know what the issue was. So I was like, okay, well, see if we can talk to your boss or whatever. And then she tweets me to say, hey, guess what? I got laid off. And I'm going, yes, this is fantastic. And then I realized, okay, that's probably the wrong reaction because that's good for me, not so good for you. But sure enough, as a result of that, here she is, Stephanie Hughes. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dougie.
So thanks very much for getting laid off. I really appreciate that. That works out well for me. Now, give us the introduction as to your background. So I became aware of your work. Again, you've done a whole lot of research writing and things like that. What exactly is it you do? And for the 10 million people watching who are looking to hire you, give us the pitch. What should they know about you?
All right, so my background was in journalism. That was my educational background. And as soon as I entered the working world, I wasn't really sure exactly which beat I wanted to cover, but I just knew I needed to be employed. So quickly got this business writer role at this credit rating agency and discovered that I had this untapped interest in business and finance. So then I just kind of took off from there. I started writing about industry disruptors like Airbnb against the hotel industry and kind of how technology plays a role in making financial trends better. And it was mostly commercial real estate centric, but I was actually able to work with other teams like telecom and asset-backed securities, a boring way of saying that. Mm-hmm. It basically looking at Canadians and their debt. So it was a good gig while it lasted. And now that I'm laid off, I'm kind of looking to do something similar.
So anybody who runs anything to do with, finance, business, you're in the media, whatever, you can track her down. Steph Hughes 95 on Twitter. That's the easiest way to find you, right?
Steph Hughes 95.
I actually know her email, so if you email me, I can get it right to her. But Steph Hughes 95. Okay, so probably by the time this airs, you're doing something else already, anyways. But for now, while you're in this little interim period, we're gonna pick your brain. So, the retail apocalypse, and you've written a bunch about this. What am I talking about? What is the retail apocalypse? How would you define that?
So the retail apocalypse is this very foreboding term used to describe this escalating trend of store closures or companies looking at restructuring their assets, which leads to store closures in that strategy. So what makes it so apocalyptic is just the frequency that's happening. So it's almost like every week you look at the news headlines and all of a sudden this store's going under, that store's going under. So it's causing concern for a lot of retail owners, a lot of retail workers, people who enjoyed these stores that are going under. And it's something that's more U.S. centric, but it definitely has some bleed over.
Well, and we see it here. We're recording this at my office at Yonge and King in Toronto, and we have lots of clients who come in who say, well, I was working at Sears for 30 years and I was in, head office and management roles, and well, now Sears doesn't exist. And in the last, Sears, Forever 21 recently filed for bankruptcy. Bowring, I guess, is closing a bunch of stores. Even HBC is talking about, I don't know what they're going to do, but there's issues. Now, we're recording this middle of November, and there was somebody else, I think it was Bouclair or something, who's going through some other kind of restructuring, and we don't know if we're going to close stores or not. So you're right. It literally is, almost every day you're hearing these. And we're only talking about the big names. Of course, there's lots of mom and pop stores that have also got into the same trouble. So what is going on here? Is this as simple as, well, we all buy stuff on Amazon now, and it's as simple as that, so that's the only place we buy things, and that's why all the stores are going under, or is there something else to it?
I'm sure they wish that was the only issue that they're facing, but the issues are, a lot of these companies are just taking on too much debt, and that's kind of what does them in at the end. So it's a little late in the cycle, late market cycle. they take on a bit too much debt by expanding, so snapping up real estate here and there or trying to expand business ventures, usually into other countries, realizing that they don't have the revenues to back it up for different reasons, as you mentioned.
So wait a minute, if you have debt, you have to be able to pay it back?
Oh, yeah.
This is your point here? That's
Make no mistake.
That's
You gotta
crazy
pay that
talk
back.
there, woman. I don't know about that, but okay. So, and that's one of the big driving factors then. And so Sears, let's talk about them. And obviously they've been gone now for, I don't know, a year or two. I can't remember when it was, but I think every box you just ticked happened with Sears, right? They certainly weren't on some aggressive expansion thing because they were already everywhere. But there was a lot of head office in the U.S. scooping money out of Canada too. Wasn't there a bit of that kind of stuff happening?
There was a bit of money moving around. One of the issues with Sears is that they just didn't adapt fast enough. So with their e-commerce solutions, they were kind of investing in their online store through capital and with effort, but they let their actual physical stores kind of go to the wayside. So people just walked in there, realized, oh, this isn't the Sears I remember. Yeah, it's a dump, to put it bluntly.
Yeah.
But
I can say those words.
Yeah.
We'll bleep it out later. So you mentioned the term late cycle in the retail market. What do you mean late cycle?
Late cycle meaning that we had a good run, the 10-year bull run, as the media frequently calls it. We're a little bit past peak now, so that means consumer sentiment's just not as strong. The U.S. economy is not expanding at the same rate that it once was, and this leads to lower consumption. It leads to people really prioritizing what they actually want to spend money on. So they probably can do without expanding their wardrobe or something, for example. So there's that, there's consumer sentiment, and there was actually a chart kind of going about Twitter 2 weeks ago, late October, that Canadian retail sales were just in the dump. They weren't good at all.
Yeah, and that's why I'm glad we're having this conversation now, because of course we're moving into the peak holiday spending season. And there are a lot of, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding is a lot of retail stores do a big chunk of their sales sort of between, American Thanksgiving and Christmas, late November into December. So they better be hitting the ground with all guns a-blazing. And if they're not, then you've lost your whole year. And I think that was certainly an issue with Sears, that, well, you go into the store and it's kind of, it's old stuff. They haven't been refreshed, and that was that. So if you were, let's say instead of being a journalist, you're going to get hired as a consultant to that big retail chain, because why not, right? Why not? So what kind of advice would you be giving a big retail operation? So, I mean, you already kind of hit on one, and that is, keep your debt levels low. And I think that's good advice for human beings too. Is there anything else that retail stores should be keeping an eye on as things to not to worry about?
Yes, retail stores need to. I believe if I were running the show here, they need.
You are. I've given you the power. You're running it.
As somebody who's running the show, I would strike a perfect balance between the online offerings and the offline offerings, and actually kind of make them work in harmony. And what I mean by that is, you order something online, you don't like it anymore. You don't want to go through the trouble of, getting a box, returning it, getting all the return address, how many stamps do I need? So you just take a quick drive to the store, give it to somebody else, get your money back, let them deal with that. And while you're there, you probably make a few other purchases, or just, oh, I'm at Walmart, I got to go pick up some toilet paper. So it's a good way of establishing convenience, and it brings people into your store, so establishing foot traffic. And you also get that revenue with the online strategy. So if I actually decide to keep that item, that's still revenue that's going back to the company. Another tactic I would use, and this unfortunately would lead to store closures, is keeping the debt low by doing a fleet review. And you hear the term fleet review a lot with these retail closures. I do a fleet review of the assets that are performing and the ones that aren't, are kind of like struggling behind. So the sales per square foot are a little bit lower. So any mall or store in a secondary market, meaning not Toronto, but something a little bit further out, like Pickering would be secondary, I would probably reassess those assets to see how much foot traffic they're actually generating, and if the revenues just aren't justifying the costs of maintaining that asset, because running a store costs money. It's
big bucks, sure.
Yeah, it's not even just the rent per square foot. It's paying staff, the utilities, maintenance, the taxes. It's an insane amount of money. So if it wasn't actually justifying the revenues wasn't justifying the cost, then I would close those down. But I think that hybrid model of online, offline options would definitely be the biggest one. So Walmart did that well, Sears not so much.
And so I can go online and research this stuff. If I want it right away, I can go into the store and buy it. Mm-hmm. And if it isn't what I wanted and I ordered it online, well, I can take it back to the store. I don't have to ship it and pay for shipping and all the rest of it. So is Walmart doing that okay? Are they doing it fantastically? Are they like, how would you rate them?
I would give them a 10, actually.
Really? Wow.
Because I think that's like the best. They were the early adopter of that, and I think they've just done it better than, unless there's another store that's doing it better, but that's the one that I kind of say is the prime example of that, because the return centers are just right there. And so if you buy an item, you can just return it and be in and out pretty quickly, or you can do more shopping. Like the options are there. So, and
I guess that's good for the retail store, because if I'm dropping the thing off anyways, returning it, well, I'm there anyways.
Yeah, exactly.
And I need a new one of those things because I bought it for a reason in the first place. So there's probably some synergies there. Now, I'm thinking about this then. So if there are stores closing, then that probably means there's empty real estate.
Yes.
So if I'm an owner of a mall, this is not a good thing. So now you get to run the malls. What should I be thinking about? Are there alternate uses I can use my mall for now that people aren't buying stuff at stores as much?
Right, yeah. And this is where I think the topic gets really interesting, because mall owners are getting very creative with how they actually use the space. Because you're right, a big store like Sears leaves your mall, all of a sudden you've got this huge vacant space that you still have to pay money for.
But we're talking, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 square feet.
Yeah,
probably.
it's an anchor tenant. And what that means is it takes up the largest segment of the mall. So all of a sudden you lost that space. You've got to come up with a solution to that problem. So one thing that malls have been doing is that they've been segmenting the space. So they've been dissecting it, kind of either splitting it in half and taking on two smaller tenants. So that works for the tenant because they don't have to commit to this large space. And it also works for the mall owner, because if one of them decides to leave and it doesn't work out, then it's not as big a loss as a huge department store like Sears. Another thing that they're doing is they're actually taking on tenants that are not necessarily retail tenants. They're experienced tenants. And what I mean by that is, I'm sure you've seen some VR headset setups in malls and escape rooms. They really blew up. So it's about establishing that foot traffic that brings people in. So a couple of teens say, hey, let's try that escape room that just opened up in town. And while they're there, maybe they decide to grab dinner, maybe catch a movie after. It's about bringing in that foot traffic, which then creates the potential for more sales. And then just having community events like, the whole family decides to go see some sort of live band, for example. I'm not sure how many malls actually do the live band thing, but it's about bringing the family in, and then all of a sudden they say, okay, well, we'll go get some smoothies, or maybe Timmy needs some new shoes. And while they're there, they make those purchases, and that's good for the whole ecosystem there.
Yeah, so malls will evolve to being more than just stores, retail stores. There'll be a whole bunch of other things. So, okay, I'm thinking this through here now, because you're a big fancy mall owner in this scenario. Would I not also be considering residential as part of my mall? Does that make sense? So I've got all this empty space, and is it possible? I guess there's probably zoning issues in that, but are there any malls that are even looking at something like that? Well, we'll put a condo in the middle of it then, or split it up and make it where people can live. Is that a thing, or is that we're not at that stage yet?
I think some malls have been adopting that strategy. I know some malls have adopted some co-working spaces in their mall, but I think that requires a lot of renovations and kind of really thinking intensely about how you want to use that space. But yeah, there's definitely that mixed use asset where you've got a ground floor that's retail and then the rest of it would be residential spaces. But I'm not sure how widespread that is.
It's kind of hard to take an old Sears store and turn that into a condo. Okay, so great. I got an 80,000 square foot living room that's 3 stories high. It probably doesn't really work. So, okay, let's get back to the fundamental issue then. Did we have too many stores? Is that why they're closing? Or is it more that, no, we're still buying even more stuff than we ever bought, but we're just buying it through Amazon or online channels? Because in my business, people get into trouble having too much debt, and debt is a result of buying stuff. So I don't get the impression we're buying less stuff. And correct me if I'm wrong, maybe we are. I mean, the population continues to grow. I assume we keep buying stuff. So if we're buying more stuff, how is it possible that we have fewer retail stores?
Because there are generational shopping shifting attitudes. So millennials and Gen Zers, people who are coming up after the millennials, they tend to want to buy experiences rather than actual products.
So you're talking like teenagers, people in their 20s, that kind of thing. Okay.
Right. So instead of spending money on a new wardrobe, they want to spend money on a concert to see their favorite band or experience a new country. So there's that shift that people are just less materialistic. I think with the retail sales that I mentioned earlier, Canadians are just kind of spending less because past the market peak, it just makes sense that with the credit contracting, consumption goes down. So people are being more careful so as to not take on debt.
So are people less materialistic, or do they have less money? So if I'm a millennial, which clearly I'm not, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm clearly over the age of 20. Although I'm well preserved, I'm not that I'm saying I haven't had work done, but I probably should. So if I'm 25 years old and I've got a massive student loan debt because I had no choice, I needed to go to school and that was the only way to do it. So I've got massive student loan debt. And I start off with, a job as an intern somewhere. I'm not making a whole lot of money. I got to rise up the ladder, whatever. I don't have a lot of money. Is it as simple as that? So if I've got $1 to spend, I really want to get some, value for it, as you say, an experience. Is that what's happening, or is it, oh no, we're no longer materialistic? What's your take on that?
I think you're right. Incomes do have something to do with it. So while incomes have kind of remained flat as opposed to everything around us getting more expensive. So if rent's surging, you're just bringing in the same amount of money. You're probably not going to be spending as much on non-essentials. And with the student loan example, when I was paying off my student loan, I wasn't shopping
You had no money.
Hudson's Bay. Yeah, I just didn't have much to spare after. So, and I'm sure I'm not the only millennial that kind of thinks that way. We prioritize our housing, our student loan repayment. And do we really need a new jacket every couple of years? Maybe we can just kind of use the same one, make its kind of life extend a little bit. So yeah, I would much rather go to a concert rather than do that. So save up for something that would have more value to me in the long run. Gotcha.
So, okay, so if we've got this environment where we have shifting demographics, so my generation, certainly my parents' generation, bought everything at Sears. We're picking on Sears today because they can't sue us. They're gone. So, if I needed a washer or a dryer, then I got Kenmore or whatever the brand was at Sears. And if I needed clothes, well, I went to Sears. That was just the default position. Whereas, my sons who are, 19, 20, 21 years old, that age range, they buy stuff on Amazon all the time. Like it's they don't even think about it, and they wouldn't know what Sears was. They don't go to a department store. So there's this shift happening. But so if you were running a store, then you're now back running stores. Okay, this is back to your first job again. So what can I as a store do to avoid closures? Is it inevitable that the world is changing? People are buying more stuff online, or they're buying less stuff, and therefore, you know what, we're just going to keep contracting? Or is it what you're saying that, well, it is still possible to survive, but they're going to have to reinvent themselves? Is that what it comes down to?
It definitely comes down to reinventing yourself. So if your priority is to maintain your actual physical locations, because there's still a value in actually having a physical space for people to go in and happen upon a purchase. I know that there's actually some online giants that are trying to scoop up some real estate for that same reason, because there's still a value in somebody walking in and kind of seeing the products. But if that's your priority, then you need to give people a reason to come into the mall. So into your store. So either offer an in-store exclusive that is advertised online through social media where people are actually picking this up, or you need to actually invest more in your online presence and then just kind of restructure your physical assets because you probably won't need them as much. So personally, I think establishing that harmony. Since I'm running the show here, I would
I
would definitely keep that as the just make it as convenient as possible, whether they're online or just out and about.
Yeah, and again, I'm not a fashion guy, as everyone can tell, but I don't see how I could buy a jacket online. I don't understand that even concept. Now, could I buy shoes online? Well, matter of fact, I have. The brand of running shoes that I like, well, I know what size I take, and they come out with a new model every year, but it's basically the same, and the kind I like, there's no stores that, stock them, so I get them online, and that's easy. But most of the things, I guess you can buy online now, unless you actually have to try it on. But I like your idea that there's got to be a blend of the two. Okay, now, I don't really care about the big stores because they're not my clients. I don't care. All of my clients are the actual workers, real people. So what kind of advice would you give a real person who is working in retail now? And retail has always been a good, solid job. I mean, they were certainly fantastic as entry-level positions. When I was a kid, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, that age range, I worked in a hardware store. And, I learned how to mop a floor. I learned how to stock shelves. So you didn't need a lot of skill to start, but I certainly learned a lot. And, I remember a guy coming in one day and asking for TSP. I have no clue what he's even talking about. Didn't know what that even was. And so I, learned to ask questions. Oh, well, where would you use this TSP? Well, kid, it's a cleaning product. Oh, okay, well, let's go look in the cleaning section and see if we can, there it is, look at that. So then the next time I knew. And when someone came in asking for a floor flange, I didn't know what that is either until I learned. And by the time I left that world, I could take a look at a wood screw and say, oh, that's a number 8, that's a number 10. You learn some skills. That's less and less likely in the future, I guess, if there are fewer and fewer stores. What advice would you be giving someone who works in retail now? Is it, go look for a different career, or is there a potential future there still?
I still think there is a potential future in a retail job, especially if it's entry level. Because as you mentioned, you actually start picking up skills, and they don't necessarily have to be hardware store skills. They can be sales skills. So you actually
people skills. Yeah,
you learn how to actually pitch a product to somebody. If you become a supervisor, then you actually learn how to manage a team, which is very important in the business world. So those skills are translatable. As for looking into what the kind of where the trends are going for your specific job, I would probably pay attention to company news, but it's also a bit of a tall ask. I would just try to, just kind of keep your skills on hand, learn as much as you can for the opportunity, see if there's any upward mobility within the company, but if not, then keep those skills under your belt because they're definitely going to be useful somewhere else.
So keeping track of company news, I guess that makes sense to me because if there's, word in the street that there's problems, and it's not like Sears was a surprise. Mm-hmm. Like, it just went bankrupt one day? Yeah. Well, no, we knew for years and years and years leading up to it. So now I don't fault the employees who stayed there because if I've been there for 30 years, I've got a good job, I'm getting paid a good wage, I've got benefits, I'm still contributing to the pension plan, which ended up being a bit of an issue, but, it's kind of hard after you've been somewhere for 30 years to, go start an entry-level job somewhere else. But I guess if you were working at Sears 5 years ago, you would have at least been aware of what was potentially happening, and then what? You'd have made sure your resume was fresh. You'd have been. Is that the kind of thought process you would have gone through?
Right. Yeah. If I were in that position, I would make sure that my resume was up to date. I would make sure I was actually presenting all the skills that I've learned at Sears, and I would start to look for jobs that were similar but within a different corporation.
Yeah, so if you've got management skills, because I've managed a team, okay, well, there are other companies where that would be of use. Mm-hmm. Is there any area of retail that you are optimistic about?
Yeah, the I guess for retail, just anything online, maybe not just online, but any sales position, any job that kind of requires a tech knowledge, there's definitely leanings towards knowledge of tech. And if you can combine people skills with tech skills, you're pretty much good to go. You're good on the job market, yeah.
Yeah, and people skills, that's really a huge key because that's transferable everywhere to everything. So are there I don't want to end on this down note talking about the retail apocalypse, man. And I realize the show's about debt, so we kind of get into that. But is there a silver lining here? Is there anything that makes you optimistic about the Canadian retail market, either from the point of view of stores or the point of view of the individual workers? Or are we in a dying industry and that's just the way it is?
I think the silver lining, particularly for Canada, is that we're not as bad as the U.S. So our southern neighbors they've got like these giant malls and a lot of stores here and there. So when a store goes under, or a company goes under there, that's a lot of stores being closed. So in Canada, it still hurts, but it's not going to kill us. We're not immune to these late cycle dynamics. Like we talked about HBC kind of closing their home outfitter stores, but that was more of a restructuring decision and not so much a major meltdown. So, and I'm optimistic about people's ability to adapt. I know people are smart and they're independent. They can, if they're realizing that the market's changing, maybe retail jobs aren't the way to go, they can actually take these people skills, because you can't learn that in the classroom. That's something that's very specific to the job that you've just done. They could take these people skills, managerial skills, and then they can either start their own company or just work in another company that's not necessarily specific to retail, but that's in a growing industry, like, for example, tech. Maybe if you manage a tech team, you just learn a few kind of like these more technical skills you can actually integrate into that. So it might be a bit of an ask now that I'm thinking of it to get a retail person and just kind of throw them into the tech world, but what I'm saying is there's these adaptable skills that can kind of fit into other industries. So it doesn't have to be specific.
Yeah, and the other thing about retail, and this is what I see with a lot of my clients, is it is not a 9-to-5 job.
No.
So there are, your typical shopping center doesn't open till maybe 10 a.m. You're there till 9 at night, but they're open 7 days a week. So people are working all sorts of different shifts. If you're doing something like, Tim Hortons, well, I don't know if that's retail or not, but they're open all the time. Mm-hmm. So, and a lot of people are now on, part-time hours as opposed to full-time hours. Or you've got employers saying, yeah, here's the deal. You're going to come in and serve the pre-office crowd from 7 till 10, and then we want you to come back from 4 till 7. Okay, that kind of totally sucks. It's, double the transportation costs and everything. But what it also does is give me holes in my day and days off. I may have Tuesday and Wednesday off because I'm working Saturday and Sunday. So that may also be an opportunity then to try out some of these new skills. Well, maybe I can get a part-time job doing something more tech-related, for example. And I realize you were giving us an example. So maybe that's the other silver lining, that, okay, you've got more flexibility in retail to try some other things. So overall, you're mildly optimistic, or what? How would you rate the next few years?
So as far as retail goes, and the companies and the mall owners, I'm a little bit less optimistic. But for workers, I think they'll be able to bounce back because they're pretty resilient. And we know people can... it's an agonizing process to find a new job. I'm like,
as we know,
me.
Yes.
But it's not the end of the world, and I think people will be fine. If you're flexible in what you take on as the next phase in your career, then people will land on their feet. I'm pretty optimistic.
Yeah, and I'm optimistic too. And the reason I'm optimistic is take a look at the last 10,000 years of human history. And here we are,
exactly.
Right? So we had that Industrial Revolution thing. You're more learned than I, so you'll remember that was in the past at some point, right? And, well, we all went from working on the farms to working in cities, and we used tractors instead of horses, and that replaced a lot of farmers, but more people have jobs today than ever before. Mm-hmm. So I think you can reinvent yourself if you keep looking ahead. So I think I'm optimistic as well. Yeah. Stephanie Hughes, thanks very much for being here.
Thanks, Doug.
So once again, at Steph Hughes, STEPH Hughes, HUGHES 95. That's your Twitter handle.
That's my Twitter handle.
Easiest way to get a hold of you. And you can also search for your name and see all the articles you've written. They're all out there, and it's all good stuff. And so when you're back on the show in 2020, you'll be at your new gig, whatever that is. So when you get that job, I want you to tell the boss that one of the conditions is, well, if I ever have to do a podcast, you're going to let me on it. Okay?
For sure.
Okay,
absolutely.
Perfect. I mean, take the job anyways, even if they won't agree to it. But try to get that in there and get paid a lot too. But I think that the podcast is the main thing. Stephanie Hughes, thanks very much.
Thanks.
That's our show for today. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hughes. That was Debt Free in 30.